Namaskar and welcome to Sunset Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of national and important international issues as well. So today we're going to talk about the issue of election commission reforms. Now, the 5-judge bench of Supreme Court on Thursday unanimously ruled that a high-powered committee consisting of the Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition or the largest opposition party in Lok Sabha and the Chief Justice of India must pick the Chief Election Commissioner and the election commissioners. The Apex Court also made it clear that this will be subject to any law to be made by Parliament on this matter. The government had argued that in the absence of such a law, the President has the constitutional power to make these appointments. The verdict came on a PIL filed in 2015 by challenging the constitutional validity of the practice of appointment of members of the Election Commission. Now, the President appoints CEC and election commissioners on the advice of the government. They have a tenure of 6 years or up to the age of 65 years, whichever is earlier. 20th Law Commission, in fact, headed by Justice A.P. Shah in its 255th report on electoral reforms, which was submitted in March 2015, had also recommended a 3-member collegium to appoint the CEC and the election commissioners. So today we'll take a closer look at all these issues related to the election commission, the verdict coming in from the Apex Court and what the experts make of it. What's the way forward in terms of bringing in this and various other reforms issues which are in public domain being discussed for quite some time now. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Mr. O.P. Rawat is joining us. He's the former Chief Election Commissioner of India. We also have with us Satya Prakash, legal editor with the Tribune, and Mr. P.K. Malhotra, former Secretary with the Ministry of Law and Justice in the Government of India, is also with us. Welcome, all of you gentlemen, to Sunset Television. I'll first begin with you, Satya, because let's first take a stock of what actually the Apex Court said in its verdict and, various aspects of it, including how the court arrived at the verdict. What was the challenge in the PIL?
Well, that's very interesting. There was nothing to challenge the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not have any substantive issue to deal with because there was no allegation before the court that the Election Commission has done something wrong or there is per se something wrong in the functioning of the Election Commission. So this is rather intriguing because in law we call it abstract judicial review, where there is nothing substantive before the court, but still the court will go ahead and say something. There are two things. One is that when there is a legislative void, the courts have in the past done certain things to fill that void. But that has been done mostly in the cases where there was some sort of void due to the fact that there was no law. But here, it's slightly different in the sense that the court has chosen to amend the Constitution itself, because the Constitution has given this power to, under Article 324, this power has been given to Parliament. But since Parliament has not acted in the last 7 decades, the Supreme Court has chosen to act and said that this is the system we want to be in place, and this system shall remain in place till the time Parliament enacts a law. Okay. There are 2-3 issues. This is, to my understanding, this is a blatant case of overreach. Because of this verdict and previously because of the Supreme Court verdict creating a collegium for the appointment of Supreme Court and High Court judges, the entire system of judicial separation of powers, it has gone for a toss. This is not to suggest that Supreme Court should not have power of judicial review. It must have, and in all proper judicial systems or liberal judicial system, power of judicial review is very important. But then this power of judicial review is to be exercised where there are cases of violation of any fundamental rights, or there are any cases of executive or legislative excesses. Here, there was nothing of that sort available for the court. There was a PIL filed in 2015, and then it went on, it was pending, the court was hearing, and then it was referred to a constitution bench. They set up a constitution bench, and it was heard by them. And then the main demand was that, or rather contention of the petitioners was that to have a broad-based, high-powered committee will enhance the credibility of the Election Commission, and nothing else was contended. There was no case that Election Commission is biased. There was no case that Election Commission has something blatantly wrong, and that needs to be corrected. And that wrong emanated from the fact that the appointment panel was not broad-based.
Okay.
So, and second is, Parliament, in our case, we have parliamentary democracy. So president is supposed to act on the aid and advice of the cabinet. In this case, this was the case. But the Supreme Court has forced, or rather it is forcing the government to act on the aid and advice of a committee, which is alien to our constitution.
Okay, okay. Let me bring in the other two gentlemen as well for their views. I'd come to you, Mr. Rawat, a bit later because, you know, what Satya Prakash is pointing out. Let me first bring in Mr. Malhotra here. He's been the former law secretary as well. On the issue of, you know, judicial overreach, would you agree, Mr. Malhotra? Also, given the fact that the Supreme Court in its verdict, it also said that, you know, this order will stand valid till the time the Parliament comes up with any, legislation on this. And some experts are referring to this as a sort of, you know, bridging that gap when there is no legislation.
Vishal, electoral reform is a process, and it is being done not from today, but for the last 50 years. Many amendments have been brought into the electoral laws. Now, the issue with regard to the judgment which has come, the specific issue is with regard to the reform in the election commission itself. In the process of appointment itself, the question of reform has arisen. And it's not that in the appointment of election commission itself, reform have not been done in the past. It used to be only one election commissioner, then it became a multi-member election commission. And after that, the appointments which have been made, so far as the functioning of the election commission is concerned, it has never been in question, as Mr. Satya Prakash has rightly pointed out. Our election commission is respected world over in conducting the free and fair election. So far as the main issue of appointment is concerned, even the Supreme Court nowhere has questioned the functioning of the election commission as such. Yes. It has said that probably there should be transparency in the appointment to be made of the election commissions as well as the chief election commissioner. Now, under the constitution, as Mr. Prakash rightly pointed out, it is the power of the executive to make appointment to this post, and that executive power is vested in the President of India, and that power is exercised by the President through the Council of Ministers on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Now, what was the provocation for the Supreme Court to appoint a committee? What was the fault found by the government in the by the Supreme Court in functioning of the Election Commission of India, which necessitated a constitution of a committee itself, because there is a void, because there is no committee as such and no law has been passed by the Parliament in this respect. There have been many cases in the past where the Supreme Court itself has said that this function fall in the legislative domain of the government, and therefore the government should pass a law and Supreme Court will not intervene. To the best of my knowledge, there was no such necessity. And in case you are asking for transparency in appointment of the Election Commission and the Chief Election Commission, in the appointment to be made by the executive, probably tomorrow you may say in the appointment of the Finance Commission also, because that is also a constitutional body, the same kind of transparency should be there. There should be appointment of the CAG by a committee. You can say the same thing also. Then why the court has not accepted the decision of the legislature when they wanted transparency in the appointment of the judges of the High Court as well as the Supreme Court? Okay. I think the principle has to be the same, even with regard to the appointment the judges of the High Court and Supreme Court also. What the Supreme Court is saying in respect of appointment of Election Commission and the Chief Election Commissioner. Okay. Satya Prakash is right when he says that it is a question of judicial overreach, that if any direction was needed, the Supreme Court should have said, let the legislature, let the Parliament make a law on appointment of Election Commission and the Chief Election Commissioner, instead of itself giving a direction that it should be made by such and such collegium, and why they should constitute this kind of body, which of course I also feel is a judicial overreach. Okay, okay. Let me bring in Mr. Rawat here as well. Mr. Rawat, you heard both the gentlemen. Of course, that's one of the questions which I'll put to you in terms of, do you believe that this is a judicial overreach? Was this required, or is this Parliament's domain itself? But also from the perspective of the Election Commission itself, you've been a Chief Election Commissioner. This reform process which we talk about, and specifically the process of appointment of CEC and ECs,
Is this change required?
Vishal, I agree with my former colleague, Mr. Malhotra, and Mr. Satyaprakash as well, that Election Commission of India has been delivering timely elections with all fairness and credibility time and again, and I think whole world knows about it. In fact, there is only one project that is called Electoral Integrity Project, which creates time series data on integrity of elections worldwide. And that database tells us that Election Commission of India stands at the highest group, that is very high electoral integrity. Therefore, this is undoubted that Election Commission has been doing a sterling job. However, about the appointment, there have been attempts in our country as well. In 1990, Goswami Committee report on electoral reforms recommended some such thing, and then there was 70th Constitution Amendment Bill tabled in the Rajya Sabha in 1990, which recommended this kind of arrangement, that President shall appoint in consultation with chairperson of Rajya Sabha, leader of opposition in Lok Sabha, and Lok Sabha. I think that did not get enacted, and in 93 it was withdrawn. Besides that, 2015, yes, Law Commission in 255th report recommended this kind of arrangement, that the leader of opposition and CJI should be the part of selection process, and based on their recommendation, the appointment should be made by the president.
Okay.
I think that this order has just changed a little the whole thing, that either government follows this panel or government enacts a law, and enacting a law is total freedom of the parliament.
Indeed.
Sovereign parliament, they can make the law to set up any mechanism for selecting and appointing as Chief Election Commissioner and Election Commission. There may be many permutations and combinations for that.
Okay, so there are options, and there are permutation combinations as well. That's something which you're pointing out, that can be, brought in. There have been suggestions earlier also. Now, Satya, coming to you again, and since you started with this aspect that this is a judicial overreach by the Supreme Court when they delivered this verdict. Now, the question is, so if the law is enacted by the Parliament, or the government comes up with the law of this particular case, of course, that is their domain. But are these changes, are these kind of reforms required for the Election Commission of India or not? That's a moot question.
I agree with the basic proposition that if the appointment panel is broad-based for recommending it to the president, the names for appointment as CEC or EC, that's better. So basic proposition, there cannot be any doubt that that's a better proposition, broad-based panel recommending the names and then the president acting on that. See, the whole idea of separation of powers being part of the so-called basic structure goes for reforms. I'm appalled at this. In fact, previously, there was, in two cases at least, in the case of Lokpal or also in the case of CBI director's appointment, CJI has been co-opted. Supposing there is something wrong with the appointment, then where do we go? You ultimately go to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court, CJI is the master of the roster. So you create a situation where there is inherent conflict of interest. In any case, the judiciary should be kept completely away from the executive exercise. Corrupting the constitution. This is a very serious thing. Very few people understand that in many cases, people keep on citing American Constitution. American Constitution, there is complete separation of power. The latest system, the constitutional system, which has gone for complete separation of power is Britain, where House of Lords used to sit. They have created Supreme Court of UK, which is completely, there is no interference, or it has nothing to do with the legislature. So the whole world is, the constitutional systems, they are evolving towards complete separation of power, whereas in India, whatever separation of powers, because in parliamentary system of government, you can't have complete separation of powers, particularly between the executive and the legislature. But at least judiciary was kept separate.
Okay.
But co-opting the judiciary in the executive exercise, this is corrupting the constitutional system. This is not done. This is corrupting the constitutional system. This is a very serious thing. And you create a conflict of interest situation where tomorrow, if some appointment is wrong, then the allegations will be at the CJI, who is part of the appointment process. For God's sake, please don't do this. And this is very serious thing.
Okay.
And particularly for appointment election commission, there are 2-3 wrongs I find in this judgment. First, what is the allegation against the election commission in the functioning? There is none. Then the question is, who has the power to prescribe for this kind of law? It is Parliament, not the Supreme Court.
Indeed.
And third is, this kind of abstract judicial review, if you go on doing this and amending the constitution, then the entire constitution can be amended. Constitution, maybe it is very good, but it is certainly not the best document.
Okay.
So whatever amendments are needed, and Parliament has failed to do it for whatever reasons, so Supreme Court will pass orders to amend the constitution. This is not done, because if this trend is not arrested,
indeed,
the entire constitution can be changed by
that is pretty much clear. In a parliamentary democracy, Parliament is supreme when it comes to making laws, amending the constitution, bridging in those legislative gaps as well as and when it is deemed fit.
One more point. I'm saying, if Parliament enacts a law, if there is something wrong, you say it is wrong. But without there being any law, you say, no, this has to be the law.
Okay. Now
this is not.
That's something I'd like to bring in. Mr. Malhotra here as well. Mr. Malhotra, again, when we look at this entire issue, as Satya was saying, that fundamentally speaking, what he is agreeing to is that on broad basis, yes, there might be few options which can be looked into. Mr. Rawat was also pointing to that, and some of these options have been referred to by various committees as well. For example, the Law Commission report, which I cited. So, would you agree that yes, there is a need, but that need has to be fulfilled by the Parliament?
No, as I said in my opening remarks itself, electoral reform is an ongoing process. So is the reform in the Election Commission also, and the reforms have been done in the past. We remember, the Rawatji also mentioned about it. The Dinesh Goswami committee report in 1990 itself has suggested constitution of a committee. Then in 2015, the Law Commission of India, of which I was also ex officio member as law secretary, the Law Commission has also recommended this kind of committee. So there is no question mark on the constitution of a committee. But what should be the constitution of the committee? Who will constitute that committee is the moot question. Is it the Supreme Court will constitute that committee? I think that's the moot question. People can say that in the past also, when there was no law, the Supreme Court has intervened. And I can give the example of Vishakha case, where there was no law with regard to sexual assaultment of women at workplace. But the Supreme Court directed that till the Parliament makes a law, then probably this will be the law principle which we are laying down, should be followed by the government as well as by all authorities within the country. But I think that stands on an entirely different framework. We cannot draw an analogy from that kind of judgment. Here, the president in executive power is competent to make appointment, and that executive power is exercised through the Council of Ministers. And for making law, the power is specifically given under the Constitution to the Parliament. Parliament in its wisdom, if it has not passed a law, has any question been raised with regard to the functioning of the Election Commission? Maybe there might have been some appointments of the election commissions where it's been said that there have been hasty appointments. But so far as the functioning and independence of the Election Commission is concerned, I think not much questions have been raised in the past. And our Election Commission's functioning has been quoted by many countries, and they are drawing from the good practices which are being followed by the Election Commission. So I think when the Supreme Court gave a direction that this will be the constitution of the committee, probably that is the point which we are debating, and we are saying that there has been a question of overreach of judicial intervention in the power of the executive as well as of the legislature.
Okay. Now, there's one more issue, and Mr. Rath, I'd like to bring you in here before we bring this discussion, this discussion on this forum to an end. Of course, this is an issue which has been debated and discussed for long time and will continue to be. But one more aspect of the Supreme Court's verdict deals with the finances for the Election Commission as well, wherein the court has left it to the government, but has suggested that, some steps should be taken. So how does it work as far as the Election Commission of India is concerned, and then what kind of reforms are required in that aspect?
Actually, Election Commission of India had recommended around 4 years back that Election Commission's expenditure should be charged expenditure on the Consolidated Fund of India, as is the case with the President's expenditure. So that is pending with the government, and that would mean that there will be no discussion while this budget for Election Commission of India is passed in the Lok Sabha. I think the form is not there, but as far as the financial independence of Election Commission is concerned, it is already there de facto. Whatever Election Commission requires for the expenditure on maintenance of Election Commission and conduct of all the elections, everything is provided for, including the purchase of electronic voting machines, VVPAT, etc. When we asked that 100% deployment of VVPAT has become necessary, please give us 8,000 crores. And I think the money was given immediately, and we could purchase all the VVPATs and universalize the application of VVPAT at all polling stations. So de facto it is already there. Only de jure means you have to make it charge the expenditure. That is not there.
Okay. Okay. So the formalization of the process, formalization of that structure is something which you're referring to has to be there. But otherwise, financially speaking, Election Commission has the authority and has the money as and when required to conduct free and fair elections, which has been the case in the past as well. Well, there it is. Thank you so much, Mr. Rawat and Mr. Satyaprakash and Mr. P.K. Malhotra as well for sharing your views and valuable inputs also on this. As our experts were pointing out, various aspects of the Supreme Court's decision on appointment of Chief Election Commissioner and the Election Commissioners to the Election Commission of India, why and how it is necessary, what needs to be done, and as our experts pointed out, it is ultimately in parliamentary democracy the Parliament's right to enact a law or a legislation on any issue, which includes this one as well. We'll keep a close watch on all the developments here and come back again with some more topics. Till then, keep watching Sunset Television. Thank you.